Containerization, a really beautiful concept that solves many problems, many previous problems that the developers had. And let's discuss about this concept. First, we are going to go what was the problem before this concept came about, and what would be the dream solution, and then we talking about the containerization, and then a brief study on Docker. So first, let's assume or let's suppose that you are trying to make a project with new technologies. And these technologies would be whether it's about a new programming language or a new database or machine learning, data science tools, game development, anything you like. You would love to add them in one of them or all of them if you want, perhaps, in your project. So, what do you need to do in order to add those new technologies? First and foremost, you have to install the required SDK and software, of course. Then, after installing all the technologies that you want to add in your system, in your project, you have to configure your PC in order to. Some technologies might require to might tell you to configure your PC, and this might be a hassle, or some people might think that is some might think that is easy. So it might be easy, or and then afterwards run all the required technologies before starting this project. Before you implement the system, you have to run those projects if they require you to run. So this might be easy for one person, and you could do that for each technology that you're doing or any project that you want to do. But what if, because as developers or as a whatever you're doing, you might require another person to help you. So what if you have to do with teams? So you have to help that person to do this step again, and another person might join in your project, and you have to tell him as well how to configure those technologies. And you might even do a wiki page that might tell you the instructions. And this is a lot of hassle and a lot of time. It's time consuming because you have to create a wiki page in order for others to understand how you have to install those technologies in order to run it. Another problem would be, what if you want to try the newest versions? So, for example, you want to try a new program, the latest version of that programming language. However, you're not sure if the new version might break your project. But how would you try the new versions if you cannot remove the previous version? Because you worry that the newest version might just break your system, might break your configuration. So that's one of the problems. What if you want to deploy to a project another, which is deploying a project would be deploying in a different server, and that server might not know how you configured your system, or it's not even a deploying to a server. How about you give it to another person? You have to configure that server as well, or you have to search for a hosting website that supports your technologies. So these are those kind of problems that people tend to have previously before the concept of containerization. So what would be the dream solution though? So the best part would be no installation. You don't have to install it in your PC, which is really a far stretch. But let's just say this is the dream solution. So you don't even need to install the technology. There is no configuration, and you could run it anywhere. Everybody could run it anywhere. You don't have to configure in order to run the project or run the system. You don't have to install those required technologies. But this is a far stretch, right? Because how could you run the system without installing? And how could the system understand the software if it doesn't have any configuration? So there is a solution for that. So what is containers? The concept of container is isolating anything that is within the container from your host operating system. For example, a Windows operating system. It will never depend, or it will not depend on the host operating system, because it has its own operating system. It will have its own operating system, and whatever you put in within the container. For example, you said, I want to have Java JDK 13, while in the operating system you have JDK 8. It will have no problems with it because it is isolated from the operating system. And you can add more technologies into it. For example, you want to do machine learning and you might have different version of Python or TensorFlow. You could just put it within a container without configuring or without installing new versions within your operating system. Or for example, you have some problems with your MongoDB and you have to configure something, or in your Node.js, recently a new version came out. You could try those versions within a container instead of trying to put it and configure your system. But what's the benefit of isolating this container or this operating system from your operating system? So you don't require to install within your system. That's for sure. You don't require to install any technology within your system that requires for your project, because everything is isolated within a container. Everything is within that container. You don't require to update your version if you want to add new features. Or for example, you want to upgrade your programming language, the programming language version. However, you don't need to update within your operating system. You could just add a new version within that container. And as well, you don't require to configure, since there is no installation within your system. You don't require to configure that technology in order to work within your PC, and which would help since it's independent from your system and the installation is independent as well. You don't require to install it within your operating system. This allows, and that's the amazing part, to be portable. So basically you could deploy, you could give it to another person, you could run it within your operating system, you could run it anywhere you like, because it is independent. It's isolated from your operating system. So if you have more teams, you just tell them, okay, have this container, because if they have a different operating system like Mac and you have Windows, it doesn't matter, because that container is isolated. It has its own operating system. It's really amazing because you could work with large teams without having to configure for each team member. So one of those services, there are several services that use that concept of containerization, and one of them would be Docker. Docker is a service that uses that concept of containerization really well, especially because, and since most people know what Docker is, and this is why people love it, because it uses the containerization really well. So the concept here is in Docker, basically, I'm not sure about the other containerization services, but in Docker, basically, you have an image. So it is like a blueprint that has all the, it's a file. So basically it has what type of operating system you require, what type of Node.js you want to have within your container. Everything that you require for the technology to work, you put it in within that file. So, and within that Docker, it's a running image. That means that whatever you put in that file, it will run it accordingly. For example, you said I require Alpine for my operating system for this container, and Node.js and the type of version you want to have in Node.js, and MongoDB when you want to have a MongoDB database running. It will check on your blueprint. If your blueprint is working fine and everything is properly written, it will run this container, and the Docker will handle this container. All right. So when do you need to use the container concept? You could start it before creating a project. You could create it in a greenfield environment, create the file easy, and then run that Docker, that container, and start coding within that container, or run the project, or run the technologies that you want within that container. But also, you could even do it in the middle of the project, or you could even do whenever you want. At the end of the project, you could try doing that Docker file, creating that file, that image, and run it, and in order to reduce the problems, because nothing finishes, right? Any project that you start, it's a never ending project, and you might require to add new updates and those stuff. So you might want to try creating an image for it, so if you want to have other people to participate your project, they could run it instantly. So that's about it, and thank you very much. Goodbye.